Hello, I'm Sarah Hazelton. I'm on the faculty here at Elmira College. I'm part of the Math and Natural Science division. I started last year at Elmira College. I teach biology, genetics, started animal nutrition, love it, very fun, parasitology, and then sustainable agriculture for the first time this term three, which we're also very excited about. My background is animal science. I did my undergraduate at Penn State in animal bioscience, was thinking vet school, ended up not doing vet school, obviously, because I got a little more interested in research. Did my master's at University of Kentucky and essentially in energy metabolism in feedlot steers and looking at transport of nutrients across their intestines, so a little more cell bio-y. And then did my PhD at Purdue in liver metabolism, liver genetics, and enzymes involved in that, and looking at different genetic regulations. So that's my more indirectly related to agriculture. In a more direct way, my husband and I have owned and operated a dairy farm in Mansfield for almost 20 years, which I'm really excited about. The fact that we've made it 20 years. We started up on our own. My husband is from a dairy farming background. I am not. I grew up in DC, so totally not a dairy farming background. I've learned a lot. We've learned a lot. And I guess my take on, so the topic is food and climate and how that will affect agriculture. As you know, it will, it is. But I think that agriculture, the agricultural industry as a whole is making a lot of really good strides. So as a dairy producer, it's a little frustrating for me that cattle producers, agricultural producers get the bad rap, right? So people want to say agriculture is contaminating the environment, they're dumping feces, they're pushing out all this methane, which, yes, cows produce methane. We're working on it. We're working on ways to reduce it. Cows produce feces. But there's a lot of uses for that. So I think sometimes people get a little bit lost as far as the actual narrative and want to make agriculture the bad guy. So, and as I said, I'm totally revealing I do have a bias because I am actively involved in agriculture. But when you look at the data backs me up. So when you look at the last EPA evaluation from 2018 to 2022, so the 2022 data, agriculture as a whole was only 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions for the entire United States. And then when you look at the cattle industry, so by cattle industry, I'm talking about the beef industry and the dairy industry. They get broken out separately by the EPA. The beef industry was 2% of greenhouse gas emissions, and the dairy industry was less than 1% of total greenhouse gas emissions for the United States. We've been on a steady decline as far as greenhouse gas emissions as an industry, like now me speaking specifically about the dairy industry. And we're poised to be climate neutral by 2050, which I think is awesome. So part of what's allowing us to decrease our carbon footprint over time, and there is data from the EPA. You can go to the EPA site and check it out. You can go to the local Farm Bureau sites and check it out. You can see the steady decrease in emissions. You can see the decrease in the number of cattle. If you've been to the grocery store lately and you do eat beef, you can see the price has been rising because the number of cattle in the US has been falling, mostly due to droughts in other areas of the country where they've had to essentially send their animals to market way sooner than expected. So numbers have been decreasing of animals, but our efficiency has been increasing, which is awesome because we need to feed the world, not just with dairy cattle, but also increasing efficiencies in all animal sectors and in crop production sectors. And we're doing this by really embracing modern technology. So modern technology on the crop side, and I know this is unpopular, could include the use of GMOs, which then allows us to make use of no-till, minimal-till technology to preserve that soil structure and not have that release of carbon into the atmosphere that you have from continually plowing the ground and releasing carbon into the atmosphere. It also involves strategic use of manure as a fertilizer source, a natural fertilizer source. It's taken up very well and used well by the plant, and strategic use of that because importing fertilizer from another country is expensive and has a carbon footprint associated with it. And then on the animal side, looking and breeding for genetically for more efficient animals, animals that can more efficiently use the feed and turn that into an end product. And then what's really cool too, as far as if you're really interested in methane production, is that they're looking at new feeds that actually decrease the methane coming out of the cow. The red seaweed has been very promising as far as reducing the methane emissions from the cow. As far as getting that into the diets on a practical standpoint, we're not quite there yet, both from a monetary and from a digestibility and palatability issue. And then there's also been different strides to genetically, like through, selective breeding, select animals that are more tolerant to climate change through the SLIC gene, prolactin receptor mutation that basically has animals with a shorter coat that are more tolerant to heat. So I'm really proud as a industry professional of the strides that we've made to decrease our carbon footprint, the strides we continue to make, and that's it.
Okay, I'm Nancy Jacobson. I used to teach biology and, of course, on global warming at Ithaca College. So I'm that one. But I've retired and I am now a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby. So we work to build political will for a livable future. We do this mainly by lobbying Congress, but our members also do a wide range of other things like writing letters to the editor and op-eds and making calls to their members of Congress, all sorts of things. Now, so what I want to talk about is how Congress can help farmers deal with climate change. So there are two aspects to this. One is, farmers get nailed sometimes by, intense rains that cause flooding, and, wash their soil away, drought, intense heat. All of these things can make it much less profitable to farm. In fact, sometimes it makes it really, really hard. And so one of the things, and in fact, in May 2023, we saw a warm spell in the winter, long enough that the buds on the grapevines came out, broke, started developing, and then a frost killed them, right? So no grapes. So what does a grape grower do, right? So for some crops, there's crop insurance. And the money for that is dedicated in the Farm Bill, which is this massive bill that's put out every 5 years. But there are crops that aren't covered under crop insurance, and grapes were one of them. That may change with the next Farm Bill. And so a separate bill, so if it's wide enough damage, then they pass a separate bill to cover the damage for the farmers so that the farmers can stay in business, right, for another year. But a more interesting one, because I mean, this gets more costly as climate change proceeds, right? You're getting more intense, more frequent extreme events. And so if, we have to put out money all the time for this, that just doesn't work. Either farmers are going to be left dry or it's just going to be too much of a burden on the taxpayer, right? So, fortunately, they've been discovering that certain practices, farming practices, can make farmers more resilient. So no or low till, what Sarah was talking about, not, plowing up the ground every year. And using cover crops so that the ground is covered over the time you don't have a cash crop there. Rotations, crop rotations, things like that. All of that builds a healthier soil, which can hold more water, and the water drain, goes into the soil instead of running off or flooding or puddling, right? And so the problem is, though, that it costs money to make changes in your farming practices. So there are a number of programs in the Natural Resources Conservation Service of the USDA that help farmers. And that is funded. These are cost share. Is that it? Oh my, lots of questions.
Yeah, the good stuff.
Yeah, really. Hey, everyone. My name's Zeke. I am a Zeke Pierce. I'm a worker owner of a local agricultural cooperative. We have a community focused fruit and vegetable farm. We also run a cannabis program and a dispensary in town. We've been part of the farmers market scene in Chemung County and Elmira for about 4 years. We're relatively new to the game, and we're very small producers. We operate what would be known colloquially as a permaculture based program. We have an approach to cultivation that is one would misdescribe it as unique. It's really not that unique. It's pretty much the way, trying to mimic the way things have always been done as close to possible as you can, to just sort of understand that most of the components you're dealing with are part of a really long story, of relationships and things that have had to have major effects on one another over like tens of thousands of years together to even become what they are today. So you can stop about 1930, 2010, somewhere in there, before the use of fossil fuels, mechanized, industrialized farming, and sort of know that, okay, well, we made it that far without ever utilizing a single component of the things that we're talking about today that are problematic. Okay, plastic is like as old as your great grandfather. Great grand, I don't know how old plastic, 1930-ish, bioplastics, synthesized. I have a background in, I studied sustainabilities, and I also have a little bit of an entrepreneurial background. I work a little bit, I travel quite a bit, and I'm here as somewhat of a sustainabilities practitioner. We sort of approach our enterprise and our business from a sustainability standpoint, understanding that sustainabilities is not, it's not any of these sort of isolated attempts to do a minimal waste program or to utilize recyclable components or to efficiently get from one place to the next. These are just, most places just elements of everyday life that most people don't need to make exceptions for because they are a regular part of their normal culture. We do need to start with an honest just admission that we utilize power at a just unreasonably irresponsible rate as an everyday citizen of our contemporary society. Is that your personal fault? Absolutely not. Do I charge my phone? I absolutely do. But we just historically utilize things and materials and energy wild rates, even compared to our other fellow humans who live quite luxurious, nice contemporary lifestyles as we would think about. I don't want to run out of time. Some things that I think are worth considering: agriculture versus food. Okay, we're talking a lot about agriculture, and agriculture is a big industry. As Nancy, I believe, was talking about the agricultural bill, the spending bill in Congress. Okay, this is the second largest spending measure in the government next to the military spending. It's the biggest bucks of your tax money get spent. It's large pillar of the US economy. That's not food. Okay. Food is a relationship that you have with things that grow and things that you eat, and cooking meals and relating smells and sensations back to earthly experiences, you know, the things that connect you together with other people and community members and the folks that you sit around a table with and share space with and gather with. Like food is that. It's a cultural metaphor and an abstraction, and it is precious, you know. Agriculture is like 15 different industrial processes turning at once. They range from the plastics industry, the fertilizers industry. On some levels, people do agriculture at all different limits of sustainable ranges, but when we're talking about those big John Deere dollars, where those big billions are getting spent, this is what they are. They largely are, yeah, this is worth considering while we talk.
Love your phone. So I'm at most a gardener. I have a powerful relationship with food, particularly chocolate and coffee, both of which aren't always the most sustainably sourced, but I'm willing to pay that. And that gets to the food idea of, are you willing to pay for more sustainable food? Because you will pay more. To do things with permaculture and things, usually you produce a little bit less than conventional. So that's something you're going to pay for. And my primary concern, of course, is water use. Water is the most precious thing we have, and yet it's so cheap in many situations. We pay, you can pay a lot for a 1 liter bottle of water in plastic that's actually no better for you than the water that comes out of your tap, unless you're in areas that do a lot of fracking, and then maybe we just wonder. So, you know, it depends on where you get your water from. But again, water is incredibly valuable. Farmers need it. They need it regularly. They don't need like a huge pulse now and then nothing later. They need regular access. And yet, you know, one of the things I think about is our aquifers and our groundwaters, because those have been the more reliable sources of water. And yet, if you go to the Midwest, west of the Mississippi, and you get into the Ogallala aquifer, one of our largest shallow aquifers, there are regions where in Texas, the aquifer that used to be just below the surface is now more than 150 feet below. That means we've dropped this enormous aquifer that expanded across all of these states, 100 feet or more. That's an expense to the farmer, because now instead of just drawing from the surface, they're having to dig incredibly deep wells. And this is not sustainable. It's expensive for the farmers, and it's a challenge because that was fossil water. We talk about fossil fuels. We have fossil water. These are waters that were sequestered in these aquifers when there were shallow seas over our continent. And so these waters will not be replenished, and yet we're using them at an incredible rate without a backup plan. And so this is something we really need to think about, because it's important for the farmers, it's important for us. And yet it's not being thought about. And this is a great concern to me, because what happens is, okay, we focus on the farmers, but where's the water for nature? I'm an aquatic biologist. I'm interested in streams and rivers and lakes. Where's the water for nature? There was a huge hubbub about California. The new administration said, we're going to save California from fires, and released all this stored water that had been carefully rationed and just dumped it. Most of that water was wasted. Didn't do anything for the California fires. And that was a policy mistake. Never will be admitted, but that was an enormous mistake, a massive waste of water. We need to do a better job of sharing water to all systems and not focusing just on human use. I honestly don't give a crap if the Kardashians have a beautiful green lawn. We are wasting so much water on lawns, and what do they do for us? We need to be making sure that water is available for farmers and not our lawns. And so we need to conserve water. We now have an incoming administration, which is probably going to overturn low flow showers because apparently they don't clean our president's hair well enough. So these are some of the challenges we face is we are backpedaling. We're now apparently emphasizing plastic straws instead of moving to paper straws. These are all, we are taking 10 steps back from sustainability. If you follow the upper administration, and my word to you is don't. Continue on the path. Don't use plastic straws. You don't need straws. Straws are for babies. Drink out of the cup. And so these sort of things are really important to consider. Is water is crucial. It is our lifeblood, and you can't drink ocean water. And to convert ocean water to potable water uses enormous amounts of fossil fuel. So this is really critical. I want to emphasize the incredible value of water. Water is how we get our food, and yet it's not being rationed well enough. And so we really need to be careful about that. And that is me getting off my soapbox now, even before the alarm.
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone have questions? I hope so. Go ahead.
Oh, hi, Lee Pierce. I co-own the farm and the business with my brother. Zeke. I like that you're interested in what you're saying about the NRCS USDA. I wanted your take on something. So I have applied for every one of these programs that one can apply for.
Yeah.
And I've gotten the same feedback from Waverly, from I can't think of the one that's up yonder, but the programs are being funded, but the offices are not being staffed. So and I think our local extension, Cornell Cooperative Extension, which I deeply appreciate them, but they turnover, they don't have the time or the resource or the energy or the staffing to work with us to find the grant. I mean, I have a PhD in rhetoric, and it's almost impossible for me to fill out half of this paperwork. I imagine it's difficult for everyone. What do we do about not getting the fund, not just the funding, but making sure that the funding can be allocated and get and the processes of applying for the grants and getting graded for the grants and getting qualified are happening? Because right now the money in Portland is being, in Oregon, is going to where it needs to go, and for us it often gets lock jammed around our area. If you know the answer, you may also not know, but I'm just curious on your take on that dilemma.
Yeah, well, and I've heard that I've heard a lot of farmers say that it's a lot harder to get a grant if you have a small farm compared to if you have a large farm, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, we just lobbied for a bill, increased TSP, technical service provider access, because there aren't enough of those either. And there aren't enough NRCS people to train those people. And so this bill says, okay, let's get a lot more sources, like the American Soil Society or whatever it is, and these others who have links to, farmers, people who know about agriculture and stuff. We will train the trainer and have them do it. Now, the ultimate certification would still be by, NRCS would have to check the certification, but at least, they wouldn't have to have all this time that they'd have to spend. And it looks like that will probably make it into the next farm bill. So,
For those lobbying efforts.
well, but then again, we're in a different world now.
Right.
Yeah. So first of all, the Farm Bill was supposed to be rewritten, come out again in 2023. So it's every 5 years. And the last one was 2018. And so that would mean 2023. Well, they made an extension for that one. The House actually got a Farm Bill written. The Senate did not in the last session. But they never, it got out of committee, but it was never voted on. They just ran out of time. And so I don't know how much they'll use the one they came up with last time, because that had the TSP Access Act in there. We'll see. We'll see. Another really, about these grants, one of the things is that there's not enough money for all the people who want all the grants, right? They've been oversubscribed for years and years and years. So in the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, I know it sounds like it has nothing to do with climate or agriculture or anything, but it did have a lot to do with climate. And part of that was agriculture, to fund, provide more funding for these programs, for these NRCS programs, and with the proviso that they would fund climate smart agricultural practices. So last year, that Farm Bill that they came up with, first they were talking about incorporating all that money into the Farm Bill. One thing would be positive because it would then increase the amount of mandatory spending, because you don't have to keep going back to get appropriations for the mandatory funding. But they wanted to have it split it between commodity title and the conservation title. And we're going, no. It's got to go into the conservation funding, because that's where these grants are funded. And then they did that, yay. But some of it still wasn't earmarked for climate smart ag. So we'll see. We'll see. I mean, especially now that everyone's supposed to wipe the very words climate change out of every document, every website, everything the federal government does. So it's made it harder, but there's one thing about Citizens Climate Lobby: we bet the farm on relationships. And we've built a lot of good relationships with our members of Congress. And so I think we can get some things done that other organizations can't do at the federal level. So I will finally stop talking.
Thank you. That was very illuminating.
On point.
Pardon?
Well, for your grandparents, great grandparents, 40 years ago. I never wrote with plastic. I wrote with glass stations. We need to revert back to things.
So, I'm so sorry, I can't hear you. I apologize. I can't hear you, but I want to hear you. Can you repeat it? Thank you. Sorry.
Much louder.
Yeah.
Excited, but I couldn't hear what was
So,
happening.
I would say, on the point, we need to revert back to what our grandparents and great grandparents did. They had their own gardens. I have a garden. You gotta come and see my basement, okay?
Please.
Full. My grandparents. Without plastics. We need to get rid of plastics in our our homes. It's a matter of convenience for everybody around here, all right? You know, you didn't run electricity till all hours of the night, okay? You went to bed when it was dark, you got up when it was light, that's hard for me to bed. But, you know, we need to look at those practices we did 50, 60, 70 years ago, okay? Our local farmers, I grew up in a farming community. Everywhere I was, everybody had a farm, okay? My uncle had a farm, you know, the best milk comes from glass bottles, if anybody knows that.
Burn dairy.
My husband doesn't believe it. My husband finally realized eggs from the chickens across the road are better than the eggs at the store. We need to start doing practices in our own home. Not asking for the government to help us. We need to do practices in our own home, collect our own rainwater to actually water our garden. There's so many things we can do to help with the climate instead of just saying, hey, let's help them. You know, as a farmer, what you do. Yes. Not convert the rivers, not convert those streams so we can water other things that never had the water that they have done. That's how I feel about it. I do it on a daily basis.
And so you're making a great point, but one of the challenges we have is that what do you do in New York City? So again, this is a great opportunity here, but if everybody started a farm, our land use would actually, the agricultural land use would skyrocket. So I have to think about natural systems. I love what you're saying about getting rid of the plastics. Great. You know, we are using them for way too many things. Some are good, some are really crappy. I don't like getting a plastic knife, fork, and spoon and a napkin in a plastic bag to have my lunch. But I will say, I love what you're saying about people farming, but we got to think about the fact the majority of people live in urban areas, and urban gardens are really tough, and sometimes they use more energy than they're worth. And I don't want to increase our agricultural footprint. So we do need to support more intensive farming. I love what you're saying about people who can doing it, but and I'm totally behind not much plastic, but I am concerned about, if we focus on everybody going back to the old ways, we can't feed people, we can't feed enough people, and we're going to use too much land.
Then we can look at farms.
If I could, I believe did you say Zeke at the beginning of that? I'm sorry. I was having trouble hearing you at the beginning. Could I also throw in just a little bit, just given that, it's frustrating because there isn't a lot of advocacy the other direction. No one questions you walking into a place like Target and buying something just that is so grossly unnecessary in all of our lives. But there are places where even bottled water is the reason people can still drink safe and have and healthy water and travel far enough and you will find places where should not drink water. People rely on bottled and distributed water. They have to have it. Most importantly, emergency response situations. Imagine a hurricane or tornado or flood emergency response before bottled water. There are places, plastics in the medicine industry, probably alive right now because of the advancements of plastics in the medical industry, right? So we have to look at these things together and understand, like, can I really not figure out a way to get this drink into my mouth without plastic? Like, if I really think hard enough, I bet I can put what's in there. Like, I'll just pick it up and drink it maybe, but okay. But we laugh, but suppose I've just suffered a spinal injury. Okay. And now I need to drink. Straw is the most important thing in my whole life right now. I've had jaw surgery, wired shut. I can get nutrients in. I mean, this is really something we have to redirect, make sure we're not placing necessarily the blame on individual use. Of course, there's the areas we can get better with our individual use. Many people forget that recycling is actually the last step in a series of things that you can do to help reduce your use. It starts with reduce, reuse, recycle. Okay, so the very first thing is this product even necessary? Could I do a little bit better job, come up with a solution, don't need a new product to enter into the product stream? Thrift store is the easy example. Grab some glasses and some chinaware and some silver. Like to buy like a plate at this point seems utterly preposterous to me. There are like mountains of china glassware sitting at the dollar. They're beautiful, like etched crystal flutes and a series of champagne. It's amazing. But you know how the commodity fetish takes over from there. But we don't need to do that now. But so first, you reduce. Second, you reuse. Oh man, get me a big, nice, solid this or that thing. Okay, I'm gonna get one. Yeah, I'm not gonna buy that one, which is just the cheapest option. Not only the most inexpensive, but also the cheapest. Sometimes the most inexpensive is not the cheapest, but this thing is probably the cheapest, whether it's expensive or not. And you got to find that. You might have to go to a more expensive source, handmade source, local source, and guess what? You keep it for twice as long. You don't have to replace it. It's got some more capacity. Okay, now reduce, reuse, then, okay, I'm going to buy it and it's awesome. What's it made out of? Just a recyclable material? How does this break down? What happens when it re-enters the material chain on its way to the landfill? Because you know what? Landfills are always going to be there and they're designed to work well and for a reason. And if you can develop responsible materials in the beginning of the supply chain, by the time they make it to the landfill, they're not contributing to the biohazard byproducts and fallout that come from such measures. It feels hard not to be attacked by the idea, but like fossil fuels is the reason why plastics exists, and the opposite is true as well. The same is true for the modern pharmaceutical industry. The same is true for the modern fertilizer industry, which, surprise, also explosives and related tightly to military. So plastic feels so evil on its own and it's so difficult on its own. And I think maybe that's because it breaks down so small and it's so infinitesimal and so permanent. It's such a permanent thing. It's the very first thing we've ever made that's so permanent. It's so permanent that the era we live in now is defined as the Anthropocene because humans' footprint exists in the fossil record now. It is literally written in stone because of microplastics will now be a layer. One day when this isn't our problem anymore, and we're just a layer in a deposit of rock in about 400 million more years, it's going to be this layer with this strange substance in it that future humans will wonder what happened here.
Yeah, you mentioned that agriculture sometimes can get bad rap. And so the first thing in my mind is that, as you said, it's such a vast category. We first have to identify what we're talking about. Okay, full admission, I teach environmental science. So one of the questions, I was thinking about a question I get a lot from students. And I mean, when I talk about it, and I'll just say I'm vegetarian, I'd be vegan if I didn't have chickens that I have eggs. I don't expect the world to be like that. It's a very personal decision. But we know that even the UN has said moving towards a plant-based diet is reducing the ecological footprint. I mean, 3/4 of ag land globally is used for livestock. Over 30% of the methane globally is from livestock. So, and somebody mentioned something about cost and how do you get true cost pricing into this mix when you can go to Walmart and get meat cheaper, but it's from a factory farm. And we want to support local farmers and co-ops. So for people who just don't know what's going on out there, how do you try and shift a community towards supporting the small business, the small farmers, the co-ops? And how do I answer my students' question when they say, well, and I've heard a lot of people, even my local rural community, oh, farmers markets are too expensive. Like, how do you approach that hurdle, that question? And I know it's not an easy one, I'm sorry.
No, no, I think it's a great question. As far as I completely support like when you can buy fresh, buy local. I mean, and support your local farmers who are using their land appropriately, hopefully. Um, uh, as far as yes, commercially produced agricultural products are going to be more affordable for the majority of people. So yes, it is cheaper to go to Walmart or whatever. Which, and to be honest, during this time of year, that may be your only option. Um, but as far as what you mentioned about the footprint and UN saying to move towards a plant diet, I've heard that a lot too. And the data kind of goes either way, to be honest. So there is data to support that, yes, that could be beneficial if it's farmed in a particular way, taking advantage of modern technology. So I know, once again, people don't like the GMO words, but taking advantage of GMO usage that are more efficient crops. But you have to take into account also, as Dr. Smith said down there, if we move towards more plants, we're increasing our agricultural footprint and overall our carbon footprint. Because once again, not to bring up the EPA again, but when you look at the emissions in the US, over half of our agricultural emissions are from the plant side of things. So cherry picking, to me, like cherry picking methane is kind of like, so we're looking at 3% of total when there's much bigger issues at hand. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be working to reduce emissions from livestock production and across the board, whether that be swine, poultry, cattle, whatever. But in the US, we've been getting pretty good at it. There's other parts of the world that are not as good and not as efficient because they haven't been taking advantage of modern genetics to make more efficient animals, and they don't have modern feeding practices to feed the feeds that are more efficient. So overall, that kind of compounds on itself. So if you're looking at it worldwide, I can see maybe why the UN kind of says things like that. But if I'm looking, my other background's in nutrition. So if I'm looking at it from a nutrition standpoint, I have a hard time personally pushing people to go to a straight plant diet because of the fact that if not done correctly, you can have nutritional deficiencies. So
Well, okay, then let's switch it to, still the question is how do we, if we don't want to support CAFOs or factory farms, because we can't, since we're talking about justice as much as the climate crisis, how do we support locally? Because there are a lot of people who don't like the cruelty of factory farms to the animals. It's undeniable, or places like Farm Sanctuary wouldn't exist, and to the workers. So if somebody says, I don't want to support corporate industrial agriculture, and for people who are new at this, my question is how?
Yeah, I
how?
can talk to you, yeah. So you're always gonna need to go to the grocery store. It's in the market, right? But then you can also find the butcher. The butcher doesn't have to be the person at Wegmans. You can go to a local butcher, you can go to Hamilton Meats, and you can get a nice fresh chop. And this person is much more likely to have worked with a local farm or someone close because their business would have meant much more to them. It doesn't matter that the truck only comes on Tuesday with this type of thing and you can check this. So the first thing is you have to seek out, do a little bit of work. And it is not so hard to get to the where you see that D'Annunzio's sausage might make you the most delicious hand-packed caraway seed organic vegetable cased sausage you've ever had. You just had no idea that they existed. You know, you have to just take that one step further. There's also community supported agriculture, CSA. This should be something that you think about all the time. A CSA, they exist in your community, wherever you live. They exist here in Elmira. Some communities have several. This is where community members sign up with a farm preemptively. They say, hey, farmer, I know I'm going to drop $200 on groceries this winter or summer, right? Here, you have it. And then every week or 2 weeks, then I get to share with you what you have in abundance that week, right? This is how, when you start to think, well, you're not just act locally, shop locally, think locally, but just live live in the place that you are as a person. You know what grows here? Apples. You know what don't grow here? Avocados, mangoes, but some delicious things are here. The grapes and the apples are world class. So you live where you're at, and when things rotate seasonally, because guess what else rotates seasonally? You know how it's like pretty out today and the sun's out, and all of a sudden people are a little bit happier than they've been for like the last 4 straight months. They're dealing with their seasonal depression. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, but it's not something we take the time to stop and consider. It's thought to be a little bit, ethereal, or maybe perhaps a little bit occult, or whatever you want. But dude, go out and eat an apple that grew where you are at the same time where you are. Eat the honey from the bees that live in your region to get the pollinators that you need to try to not get sick that season. Cycle with the stuff that you have a little bit, dude, and then go get your macaroni and cheese or whatever you need to, but do it a little bit on it, whatever scale you can. Pretend or try to grow a food.
Can I comment
Grow a
on
pumpkin.
specifically
Please.
on
So many
the
things.
CAFOs and the animal abuse or cruelty or mistreatment? I want to put it out there that the animal agriculture, like the animal production side of animal agriculture, is tightly regulated, very tightly regulated. We're inspected routinely. We just had our farm inspection recently where they go through and they look at how you treat the animals, and there's a lot of incentive to not be cruel to your animals. I know that the instances, the bad instances, or there have been cruelty, are the ones that make the news. And then people assume that across the board is what's going on in larger farms. I'd like to say it's not. Not only from the standpoint of that, farmers actually do, whether they care ethically or they care monetarily, they do have a vested interest in the health of that animal. So beating it, being cruel to it, mistreating it, misfeeding it is, if nothing else, affecting their bottom line. But a lot of times they go into animal agriculture because they enjoy animals and love the animals. On the other standpoint, it's illegal. You would lose your license. And a lot of, like, at least in dairy, the co-ops are tying the treatment of the animals to whether or not you are allowed to legally ship milk in the United States. So I'm sorry that that's a narrative that some people believe. I just don't think it's a true narrative.
Well, unfortunately, as a scientist, my narrative comes from research. It doesn't come from some, as you said, cherry picking.
I would ask you then to yes, ma'am.
But I would say that what will make a lot of people feel better would be when the regulations take livestock and give them the same protections as, say, our pets, because now they're pretty much material goods. And also I could go into that. I don't think people want to hear more about that right now, but and now with this administration, we're already seeing a push for reduced oversight. And given that we've got enough to deal with already, like antibiotic resistance and a rise in avian flu from high density poultry CAFOs, I think though maybe it's something good to pay attention to is oversight and enforcement as our government workers are fired and unfunded, and that does concern me. So
yeah, it's a viable concern, but
so I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree.
Yeah, I think we will.
Because I've been working in that field for a very long time too. So
As have I.
okay, you can talk for a while.
10 minutes left,
Yes.
so one more question. Go ahead.
How are the rebound tariffs and immigration policies affecting agriculture?
Oof.
Would say not great.
You want to know, it's maybe the most practical thing to ask probably about the dynamic, the largest workforce in the largest funded branch of the government behind the military is immigrants in the United States who've run the agricultural industry top to bottom. Pick all the food you eat, if it comes on a train, if it is to the point where it is trafficked internationally, slap a Haas avocado or whatever we're talking about here, all this work is done by migrants. It's all done by undocumented migrant workers. Not necessarily the migrants you're thinking of either, like Like sometimes people who don't even speak English as a second language. These are people that might come from communities that get trafficked in and out of, really, really rotten situations. And I mean, it's not hyperbole. Like if you think about the idea of someone working a field, a proper person picking food in a field, it is stereotypically done by certain members of the class society. Like the farmers' kids are usually out there having fun doing it and every day, but like that's not the everyday gig for most of the folks who represent agriculture. Most people ever will talk about agriculture. So you consider, and this happens largely, California produces so much of the state's food, produces like 21% of the total food in the United States happens in California. And if you haven't been to these places and seen this stuff happen and looked at a large farm that's being run entirely by transitional migrant workers who follow seasonal ripening patterns and changes, and they move around. Again, very common line of work for a lot of people throughout the history of the world, but when you do it on a hyper mechanized, quantum industrialized level like the United States does. Just one other thing to consider. When you think about people growing food in the large industrial agricultural market, you probably think that they're growing food for your grocery store. And you should know that 80 to 90% of all of what's being grown, everything you're thinking about, is not made to be made into food for human beings. The large portion of it is being grown to be made into food to be fed to cattle, and not dairy farm cattle, beef farm cattle. Whole different deal. They eat soy and corn. And guess what? Those farms aren't here. They are in China. They are in emerging markets where people are willing to pay more for beef feed and beef cattle, because you know what China doesn't want to do? Blow up their fields with a bunch of GMO corn and have to grow enough corn for cattle feed. And they don't want Monsanto soybeans. They don't grow Monsanto soybeans. They'll take it from you after you process it into meal, and we'll grow our cattle industry around that. But no, you guys can grow the soy. Just understand the part that you play in that this plays in the global industry. So you take those workers away, what little of the work that they actually do to produce the food for you is now gone too. And who do you think gets held up first? The company that's being represented on that larger industrial scale by those bigger workers who deal with those international contracts, or the guy who's making peas for Wegmans? Who wins that sword fight, right? So this is something you don't necessarily experience here, because we don't have the ag. We have the ag that we have here operates a little bit differently. We don't necessarily have some of these, but get to a place where it happens at the larger scales. You'll see these people. They come from Central and South America largely, but not exclusively. They run this country. They always have run huge portions of the industries in this country. They are in the wave. This wave has come before. Other groups of people have experienced this at other developmental crises moments in the United States, like constructing a railroad, or building out the highway system, or the earlier farmers, the miners, the Irish miners in this region in northern Pennsylvania, still fall out even further down. But this is like an old story, guys. It's sad, but the more you can contribute to your community locally with just the people that you can like walk and ride your bike to their houses, work on that circle right there.
Just to add to that, and kind of what you were saying about how, because it is more expensive to go to grocery market and buy my Thanksgiving turkey from Second Bite Farm, where I know they raise these animals humanely, and they're local. But I feel like the more of us who can do that, if we do that, then the prices may start. It'll be easier, more affordable, or easier for them to sell things more affordably to more people. I mean, does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because, and I've made a conscious effort to do that.
Yeah.
And so maybe we eat less meat.
Yeah, I mean, I would also I would think, even challenge that it's more expensive. I would challenge, I would maybe challenge that, like if you are willing to actually go around only the outside of the grocery store and never go down one of the aisles and see if you can come up with all the food that you need to sustain yourself nicely and have a good time for that week. Really challenge yourself to do it, and then just get there, be like, okay, I guess I'll go back for the Ritz crackers or whatever the nonsense is, and look, and just go check out your groceries, check out your fruits and vegetables and a couple whole grains that you found on the outside and maybe one little snack and treat. You might find it's less expensive. Processed foods is not the deal it used to be, and neither is fast foods. Very quickly, that's tilting. Also, the alternative was just mentioned, okay, well, I went to Walmart and the groceries were cheaper there. It was easier there. Well, before Walmart, we all had jobs, and everyone, and guess what? And guess what? There was a Super Duper, and there was a Weiss, and there was Two Tops, and there was so much, there was so many food options here. The food desertification of urban communities built around prison complexes. I mean, you guys, I'll write a book. I'll write a chapter about it one of these days. Economics.
Dollar General, that's where a lot of people are left shopping and you can't find fresh
Goodness
produce
sake.
in Dollar General.
Yeah.
So.
Forget Wegmans, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
7-Eleven trying to get breakfast and lunch.
I would like to say one thing. So if anyone would like to lobby Congress, please let me know. Because we have some very active members in New York 23, which is where this is. But no one can make it. Well, I finally talked a friend into going down in July, but we have a hard time getting people down to DC. And for students, there are scholarships that can help you defer the costs. Please let me know. And if social media and calling is more your thing, there are resources for that too.
Take a free trip to Washington, D.C.
But
that's what she just said. Essentially give you a free trip to Washington, D.C.
Funds available dinner.
That sounds like to me. I would go. I would totally take that deal.
I have to agree. I've been volunteering for the Sierra Club, and I'm not promoting them whatsoever. There's lots and lots of groups. But we have a team that's doing a lobby in June. That's just on an advisory committee, and they're paying for it, and I've done it before, and it's such a marvelous education, if nothing else. It's
totally.
Really, it's so memorable. Like, yes, definitely look for those opportunities, man. Yeah.
It's your information.
Citizens
Because I know some people who might.
Citizens Climate Lobby, they're big. They're a big organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.